It seems to me that we have a very interesting problem this morning in contrasting the concept of growth with the concept of change. We know that as a result of a series of external contacts, we are inclined to change our attitudes quite frequently. Such changes as are the result of the pressure of circumstances may or may not constitute essential growth. For example, we may come under an unusual pressure which causes us to become involved in an unreasonable debt. These circumstances do not cause immediate growth, although perhaps in the long run we will grow trying to meet the debt. Actually, however, we are subject to various kinds of propaganda pressures, which may cause us to hold or develop unreasonable attitudes. These unreasonable attitudes will probably ultimately result in growth, because we will discover the unreasonableness and will be impelled perhaps to mend our ways or become more thoughtful. Actually, however, the changes wrought from the outside of our lives may cause only desperate reactions or may stimulate unreasonable attitudes. By growth, we mean essentially such changes as occur within the person, as the natural consequence of a planned program of self-improvement, or such changes as come as the consequence of an unfolding inner conviction, which formally or non-formally becomes the basis of an inevitable unfoldment of character. Thus, we consider growth to be improvement of character rather than merely change. This is one of the problems that we face socially and in world affairs today. There are a great many persons who consider change for its own sake to be desirable. Sometimes this can be defended, but more usually we substitute the concept of change for the concept of progress, and the terms are not synonymous. Thus we assume, for example, that if things are different, they are better. We may point this out in a rather simple example nowadays in styles and clothing. There's a grave question whether fashions are an essential improvement. And according to recent lawsuits that have been developing around the new highly pointed ladies' heels, we may question as to whether this particular fad is a permanent source of progress to the feminine gender. In any event, in an effort to accommodate to what we call change, we may make rather foolish adjustments. Adjustments not to facts, but to passing fancies or fads, which will themselves pass out of fashion in a comparatively short time. Therefore, growth is not a matter of fashion. It is not a matter of adjustment to things in themselves inconsequential, non-important, or non-factual. Gradually, therefore, we recognize two sources of modification of conduct within our own natures, these being the pressures of change, fashion, and circumstances, and the real or essential driving influence of individual improvement. And growth, being a matter of improvement, gives us a clue immediately to the prevailing problem which arises from change. Individuals moved by change become confused. They become uncertain of conduct. They may contradict themselves, or they may get themselves into complicated situations. This type naturally will cause a desperate effort for remedy, and the individual, floundering about in his own changes, looks for some kind of security and anchorage. He may find such security only by further compromise of his own character or nature, or by the simple development of patience to endure the results of his own mistakes. More essentially, however, growth, being an improvement, can never cause a situation which is essentially less than that which preceded it. In other words, an individual, by the process of growth, does not become unreasonable. By the process of growth, he does not become more cruel than he was before, nor does he become more scattered or uncertain than he was before, nor does he lose any of the values which he previously possessed, if these values are real. Growth, because it leads to solution, or in the direction of a general betterment, always carries within itself a certain constructive and remedying power. The individual can outgrow a lesser thing, but this does not cause him to lose sight of previous values, or to develop bitterness or chagrin or antagonism. The idea that growth must be a brutal fulfillment of our own purpose is simply untrue. And a growth for the individual which can be achieved only by injury to others is contrary to the principle of growth, because growth is to make all things less injurious, it being assumed that ignorance is the real source of all injury. We say that ignorance is the source of injury because ignorance is the source of a series of particular attitudes which are themselves unsound and which can cause difficulty. Thus, for example, ignorance will cause or abet selfishness. The individual is selfish only because he is ignorant. Selfishness being a negative, being a thing of its own nature undesirable, cannot be the result of growth. It must be the result of the failure of the individual to grow in some particular situation. As growth is a gradual overcoming of ignorance, perhaps comparatively slow, perhaps overcoming only one detail at a time, but still overcoming that which is less is the only way in which we can achieve to that which is more. Thus we are always suspended between more and less, and those who wish to grow strive to become associated more intimately with that which is more, that which is nearer to the reality or closer to the truth. If we therefore begin to study the consequences of increased knowledge, we then ask ourselves rather simply, does knowledge lead to growth? Knowledge can lead to growth. Knowledge can lead to learning. But we can also take postgraduate courses in various types of information, which only enables us to become schemas, only permits us to take further advantage. We may study law to discover the loopholes in it. We may variously inform ourselves, but information is not necessarily growth. Information or knowledge can contribute to growth. Only, however, if this knowledge is properly and honorably used. Therefore, knowledge must be accepted into the consciousness of the individual, must be used as the basis of the strengthening of his own character. And unless he becomes personally something better, the accumulation of knowledge will not of itself guarantee any general improvement of his nature. There have been a number of very brilliant persons possessing a great deal of knowledge who have not found either happiness, security, or honor from this knowledge itself, but have used it for their own detriment and for the detriment of other people. Thus, we cannot say that an individual is better because he knows more, nor can we say that he is better because he has more. We cannot assume that growth must inevitably result from the improvement of social condition, particularly in the direction of excessive luxury. We can say, however, that economic security can contribute to growth by freeing the mind of certain worries, fears, doubts, or supplying the life in a total picture with those necessities and reasonable luxuries by which the person is able to devote more and more of his time, attention, and energy to the cultivation of the better part of himself. Always, growth results from right use and not from possession per se. Now it happens, and it will always happen, that an individual attempting to live better than his time will come upon certain obstacles. Certain situations will arise which will appear to be temptations and which will cause him a certain amount of concern, especially if his total nature is not in accord with the situation in which he finds himself. We do know, however, that growth provides also increasing instruments of control and use. As the individual truly grows, he becomes more intelligently capable of directing his own destiny. Again, this additional directive power may not be excessive, but we have learned from experience that true growth permits the individual who is growing to meet the inevitable consequences of the actual process of growth with increasing faculties and powers, so that actually his condition is improved rather than injured, and his new level of attainment is no more difficult for him to maintain than his previous level, because he now has additional means of maintenance. If he finds himself in a superior condition, or at a condition above that which he previously occupied, but does not have the means of maintenance within himself, then something is wrong, and what he calls growth cannot be considered to be growth. It can only be a change accompanied by certain visible phenomena which we generally associate with improvement. Thus, for example, if a man is promoted from one position to another, he is congratulated. It is assumed that his abilities justify this promotion, and that he has been raised to an honorable position because he is capable of filling that position. If all these facts are as they should be, this man will not be in trouble as the result of his promotion. But if he is not able to administer his new position with intelligence, he will be under unusual stress and strain, may be subject to later demotion, or may, in an effort to exceed his own natural capacities, place himself in a situation which will endanger his health and even his life. This is not because he has been advanced. It is because he was unable to meet the challenge of this advancement. Thus, we cannot assume that any appearance of improvement must necessarily mean that this improvement is real and next in the life of that person. This is only one aspect of our problem. but it perhaps brings rather clearly into focus the essential situation itself. Change moves a person from one place to another. Growth moves an individual upward from one state of himself to a superior state. This growth may or may not be reflected in his physical conditions. There are many cases in which a person, increasing in wisdom, has chosen to give away his worldly goods and remain poor. He has decided that in the search of wisdom, his true wealth depended upon the sacrifice of that which was no longer real or necessary to him. On the other hand, this individual is not unmindful that if he places himself in a completely impecunious situation, that he will then become a dependent, and the wise person will not voluntarily place himself in this condition. If he makes a decision of this kind, he will also bear in mind his responsibility to others who may or may not share in his own personal feelings as to what constitutes a suitable life for himself. If, therefore, he has responsibilities, growth will not cause him to neglect them, but rather for him to have a more and deeper feelingfulness toward these responsibilities and the ability to carry them with additional and increased grace of conscience. Unless these dignities are present, the individual has not increased substantially or essentially, although he may appear to have improved his mind. In the ordinary life of the individual, however, these major decisions do not so often appear. The processes of growth are very gradual, and the individual who is really growing is seldom placed in an emergency. Nature, in preparing the development of things, does not create emergency growths in most instances. In fact, very seldom do we find anything which is even to be interpreted in this way. Actually, nature does not take the 2-year-old child and 3 weeks later make an adult out of that child. Such would create an impossible crisis in the development of the child's mind, emotions, and body. And in spite of all of our various modifications in life today, the processes of physical growth still continue quietly, sequentially, inevitably, but so gradually that it is only after a period of time that any noticeable change can be observed. It is the same way in our spiritual and ethical development. We are not foolish one night and all wise the next day. We are not suddenly confronted with the pace of essential growth. We are confronted only with processes, slowly, quietly operating. And these processes produce their own natural consequences, for which we should be just as prepared as we are for the natural consequences of physical growth. As the child grows up along the way, the child gradually becomes aware of the changes that are taking place, and through the support of society and family is assisted in making these adjustments, so that maturity is not a problem, but a bestowal of opportunity. Maturity is something to be desired, except in the individual who does not mature. The person who is afraid of maturity is the perpetual adolescent. And this is a person whose maturity is of the body only, and whose mind and emotions have not adequately grown up. Man, however, because he possesses a mental equipment of his own, is capable of causing a certain procrastination in the process of his own growth. He can choose to waste time. He can choose to be indifferent to the essential needs of his life and the needs of his responsibilities. He can choose to dawdle along the way, like the schoolboy approaching the schoolhouse as slowly as possible. He is capable also of so involving himself in psychological situations that his natural growth is temporarily impeded. If, however, he does grow and fulfills nature's purposes, growing naturally, developing faculties, maturing through experience and experimentation, the various elements of his own nature, he will find that he arrives at a maturity which is a reward and not a punishment, and that the new responsibilities which he carries are appropriate to the new powers which he has to carry them, so that he will have no more difficulty at 40 being 40 than he had at 10 being 10. In fact, he has a great deal more opportunity, because he is better equipped at 40 to be 40, really, than he was at 10 to be 10. He now has perspective, values. He is able to take on experiences and observe. He is able to make more mature decisions and judgments as his life unfolds. We frequently find, however, that individuals who really believe that they are trying very hard to grow are constantly getting themselves into trouble. Perhaps this is because they are trying to grow rather than allowing themselves to grow. Now, there's a great deal of difference. When we try to grow, it is usually because we have a fixed goal in mind. We are trying to be something that we have decided to be before we know what we ought to be. And there's a great deal of trouble arising from this. We cannot, in this life, with the knowledge which we possess, decide completely and inevitably what kind of a maturity we are going to enjoy. We must decide always, of course, any future state by a present group of faculties. Therefore, when we become too fixed in estimating what we desire to be, we limit the future with our present faculties, not aware of the fact that if we permitted ourselves to grow, then the future would be measured by the faculties of the future when the time comes. This does not mean that we have no right to select a career or to determine that which is most reasonable in the light of what our present knowledge conveys to us. But just as it is dangerous to be dogmatic in religion, so it is likewise dangerous to be dogmatic in the determination of our own character. We must always allow for growth. We must always allow that the future may cause us to see new things in a better way, or even old things with more intelligence. Thus, where we get into our greatest trouble is when, in the effort to grow, we set goals, and having perhaps even achieved these goals, we then assume that this achievement constitutes the consummation of growth. The individual, for example, says that at a certain period in life he would like to be a physician. He becomes a successful doctor. He has now fulfilled his life purpose, and he has two choices: either to sit back and enjoy fulfillment, which is the beginning of death, or to continue to grow, to find new goals, and consider any achievement that he has made as merely a step towards a greater achievement yet to come. It is therefore very dangerous to place any fixed goals upon ourselves other than the grand goal that as we can and in every way that we can, we shall get better. We shall be more intelligent, more understanding, more correct in all of our procedures. If, however, we decide a certain thing which we wish to do or to be, and do not take into consideration our natural aptitudes and abilities, we may find that this decision, if we insist upon fulfilling it, will present our lives with innumerable tragedies. I know a case, for example, of a man who started out in life when he was in his early 20s. He made a simple statement to himself, namely that he never intended to become involved in anything. He did not intend to allow anyone to get near enough to him, to be his good friend, or to become his enemy. He never intended to marry, because this was a responsibility. He never intended to raise children. He never intended to do anything except maintain his own interests. Now, as obviously this was a rather isolationist position, and he tried desperately to maintain it. And he finally achieved a fair degree of maintenance for this particular idea, and lived a hopelessly impoverished and miserable life, was unhappy himself, his only hollow consolation being that he had done what he pleased. He discovered in the end, however, that it never pleased him. These types of decisions can apply to situations perhaps less obvious and equally insidious. We can settle down, for example, in a family with the final resolution that we are going to convert the members of that family to our opinion on something. Now, this is a common practice. This is what is commonly known as prevailing procedure, and is justified on the grounds that everybody does it. It is also demonstrated on the grounds that everybody who does it is in trouble, but no one pays much attention to this, as each individual regards himself as an exception to all universal laws. If, however, a person setting such a goal is unable to attain it, which is quite possible, this person is miserable. And because his goal demands that other people change, it is very easy for him to take the attitude that they are very unpleasant people if they refuse to change. They may take the attitude that he is a very unpleasant person because he demands that they change. This can lock itself into a very desperate policy, continuing over a period of years, ending in martyrdom, misery, and perhaps actual crime, if people are pressed beyond a reasonable degree and beyond the power of their own self-control. So all these things, these pressures, which we regard as more or less evidences of growth, the individual trying to force his opinion upon others does so because he believes that he knows more than they do, that he is better equipped than they are, and perhaps that he has received some special dispensation that has been denied to other mortals. All this, to his mind, adds up to the fact that he has grown, when actually it only adds up to the fact that he has developed an intensive fixation, which can cause him a lot of trouble. In the same kind of pattern relating to this situation of growth, we observe in religion, which is a field very close to our interest, and also in philosophy, that there are two distinct patterns which we have already mentioned applying in these brackets of life. One of the simplest processes in religion, and for that matter in philosophy, though somewhat more bunglesome in the philosophical situation, is that the individual can change his beliefs. He can join a different church. He can change his sectarianism. He can go out of religion entirely by becoming an atheist or an agnostic. He may feel that certain religious dispensations are wrong and step out of them. He may feel that a certain clergyman has a greater message in some other church and he can attend it. In philosophy, he may decide after a length of time that he no longer agrees with Immanuel Kant, so he decides that he will change and see how he likes Spinoza. And after he has tried Spinoza for a while, he finds that Spinoza differs from him in some detail, and therefore it is necessary for him to find a new philosopher. This goes on through life. These are changes. But these changes do not necessarily mean growth. They may mean growth if they are due to discrimination, to the individual actually becoming essentially wiser. But the majority of persons who change beliefs do not change because they have outgrown these beliefs. A few may do so, but they are more apt to change because these beliefs in some way become a limitation upon themselves, either in the way they want to act or the way they want to feel, or because of influence, or because of sophistication, or because of involvement in some advanced educational institution. These are the more common causes, rather than actual improvement to the point where we no longer can use a certain belief. Now we'll take a very simple problem that might perhaps have a little bearing on this. We were talking about it not long ago. It bears upon the religious situation. And as probably many of you know, the Chinese have solved the religious situation perhaps more effectively than any other group. To them, the more religions you belong to, the better. And if you happen to be a Taoist, and then you decide you'll also be a Buddhist, that's good. If you decide to toss in a little Confucianism, that's so much the better. And if you decide to be a Christian on top of all of this, so much the better still. Because what is it telling you? It is simply telling you that you are growing, and that you are now becoming more inclusive in your thinking. It would never occur to these people to be less Buddhistic in order to be more Christian. They would rather say, let us add all good things that we can find. So I had the pleasure once of meeting a Chinese gentleman who was a Buddhist, a Confucian, a Taoist, a Muslim, and a Christian, and was born an Orthodox Jew. And he was Chinese. Now this does not cause the slightest temperature in this gentleman. He is not worrying about his eternal salvation. He feels he has it better under control than anyone could possibly have it if they had only one faith. Now we can't ask everyone to be quite so, shall we say, liberal. It's a point of perhaps being rather scattered. But of course, in so many cases in these foreign countries, people with various beliefs study them rather carefully. Therefore, it is quite possible that this man was more scholarly in each of his beliefs than we generally are in one. But in any event, he had his religion, and it suited him very well, and it certainly was in the general direction of a universal religious consciousness. This situation sums to this point, that when we leave a religion, or we leave a church, or we leave a creed, we leave it because we are hoping to find something bigger. And if we are really in need of something bigger, this new bigness does not cause us to quarrel with the past, or to quarrel with what we have left behind. It causes us to be grateful for what we have had, in order that we might grow through it to the thing that we next desire. So where we leave anything with bitterness, if that thing itself is basically honorable, we leave it with bitterness because we have not outgrown it, but because it conflicts in some way with our own ego. If we have really become bigger, we will include what we previously knew in anything that comes after. Just as in childhood, our own childhood does not cease. It does not perish. The 10-year-old child does not die when the 12-year-old child is born. All that was the 10-year-old child continues with something more added. And without the 10-year-old child, the 12-year-old child could not be. And without the devout faith in some previous belief, we could not have grown to the point where we might desire a larger and more comprehensive belief. Therefore, growth does not put us to war. Growth does not cause us to ridicule or condemn. Growth causes us to recognize that at various stages in human development, man must necessarily believe according to his capacity to believe. And that as he outgrows his limitation, his beliefs change. But these beliefs never become evil. They never become bad. And the growth from one thing to another does not lead to hate or to condemnation or to criticism of past things, but rather all growth leads to charity, to love, to understanding, to the realization of our indebtedness to that which we have outgrown. Therefore, we move forward without conflict, without bitterness from one experience to another. The same is true in every department of life. The job which we would like to leave behind, the situation which seems to press in on us too hard. As we move from these things by outgrowing them, we come to the final realization that we cannot walk out of anything, but we can grow out of everything. And then growing out, we grow above and beyond. And that therefore we are always as beings better than we were before. And betterness in this case means more kindly, more rich in understanding, more patient, more correct in judgment, more tolerant, more generous in judgment, and with greater capacity for affection and friendship. Thus, if our growth does not result in a marked improvement in our own character, then we should examine this concept of growth more carefully to determine whether or not we have mistaken change for growth, or have permitted ourselves to assume that an increasing intellectualism is synonymous with increasing understanding, which may or may not be the case. So in our processes of growth, we do have to adjust ourselves constantly. We have to adjust ourselves also dramatically to the changing in world conditions around us. But these adjustments do not necessarily mean general acceptance of that about which we have reasonable reservation. We cannot say that all the changes in society are essentially growth. Nature, it seems, has given us this peculiar whip, the whip of circumstances. Nature has speeded up what we term evolutionary procedure in an extraordinary degree in the last 2 or 3 centuries. The person of 500 years ago lived his span and died in a comparatively unchanging society. The attitudes at the time of his death were very much the same as those at the time of his birth. There were perhaps not a dozen new families in the community. He knew all the people who were there. They had common belief together. They all attended the same church. They were all under the government of the same laws. Their rulers were stable. Their institutions were continuing. And there was very little adequate or obvious change in the conditions of things. Thus, with a certain degree of security, the individual could dawdle along, growing a little, perhaps with more leisure for the application of the principles which he believed, and perhaps more completely indoctrinated with whatever simple faith or code dominated his situation or his environment. In the last 50 years especially, this has all changed. The world around us has become increasingly insecure. The various institutions and policies with which we have been associated are themselves in a condition of continuous flux. They are changing, adjusting, modifying constantly. The pressures of our way of life have become inconsistent and extraordinary. Crisis is now a common thing, whereas in years gone by it may have occurred only once in a century. Thus we have a greater problem of adjustment with things around us. And we must make this adjustment either by growth or by simple process of accommodation. We must either accept the uncertainty of the time and go with it, dominated by the reasonable certainty that we will all come to trouble together, or else we must, in one way or another, attempt to be ourselves, or to preserve the instincts and intuitions which we hold to be reasonable, regardless of the pressure of these times. A compromise in this is more or less dangerous, and the individual who gets along the best is the individual who decides and follows one course or the other. If he decides simply to adapt himself to circumstances, he gains a certain freedom from stress as far as personal adjustments are concerned. But he becomes like a rudderless ship floating upon a stormy sea, and its course controlled entirely by the winds, the tides, and the currents. He therefore has very little to say about his own destiny. He has very little reasonable hope that his own purposes will ever be fulfilled. To be adjusted under such situation means that he has few hopes, that he has no clear purposes, that he is perfectly willing to live day by day, and to have a certain hope that persons he does not trust will ultimately protect him. This situation is reasonably common. In fact, we are being actually indoctrinated with it almost continuously today. We are being given a kind of brainwashing. The principal end of brainwashing being that we wash out the entire brain structure, leaving nothing in the terms of individual intellection. That by the time the brain is clean, it is also totally empty. Now, there are a great many persons whose attitudes are such that this is not difficult for them to accept. They have never been really thinkers. They have never planned any general course. They've never had any general conviction about what was good for them or what was not good for them. And they therefore honestly believe that the best thing they can do is agree with other people, in this way enjoying the maximum social relationship with others. A thoughtful person, however, has reached a point where such a procedure simply is not possible. If he attempts it, he hates himself. He is not able to adjust to a situation which he cannot internally accept. He can only be a play actor, taking a part or in a role which he has created, but which he never identifies with himself. He may be discouraged and allow himself to drift with this general tide, but it is never, according to his thinking, the best thing to do, the proper thing to do, or that which is most productive of good. If he cannot drift with this general tide and insists upon a certain amount of personal integrity, regardless of the compromises being made around him, he then announces more or less bitterly that this situation has placed him upon the horns of a dilemma. I've heard people actually say that they were sorry that they could think, because it was so unprofitable in terms of comfort or friendship or security. I know at least several ladies at the present moment. I'm not running a matrimonial agency, therefore we are not going to mention them by name, who have been looking for years for an intelligent husband. They want a thinker. They can't find one. They cannot find an individual who, according to their thinking, well, they may be wrong also, but according to their thinking, satisfies their need. There are also others who are quite certain that they wish to find someone who doesn't think at all, so that they can do the thinking for them. There are all kinds of such patterns. But out of these general dilemmas, we do come to the final conclusion that man either must lead his life or allow his life to be moved by circumstances. Now, a leadership of life does not mean that he decides that he will be president of the corporation at 40. This is the kind of directive that is dangerous. What it does mean, however, is that growth has told him the code by which he must live. To violate this code is to gradually disintegrate his own character. He therefore has only two possible choices: either to live up to his code or be taken apart by it. If he has any fortitude of nature, whatever, he will find that this code, although it may be more severe than that of the persons around him, is also the basis of a security greater than they can ever know. Therefore, growth brings with it security of being, security of personal existence. The individual, having achieved a certain degree of mental control or discipline, is able to direct his own conduct to conform with his principles. Now, he may feel, and does often feel, that this is a heavy burden upon him, that it is something which is going to make it difficult for him to succeed in the world he is in. Here is where his wisdom, his understanding, and his growth must sustain him. He must decide what constitutes success in terms of ethics. He must decide what he can do and still live with himself. And once having achieved this degree of approaching maturity, he cannot go back to childhood again. He cannot forget what he knows. He cannot give up principles which he has learned to be real. He cannot depart from a faith which has been grown and matured by experience and understanding. He must therefore find what he will find if he searches, namely that this new level of growth has brought with it all the instruments that are necessary for this adjustment, that this adjustment can be made in a healthy, normal, reasonable way, but that it cannot be made by a series of compromises. It can only be made when the individual, having decided what value is willing to support that value, even if it means that he must reject other things that are less valuable. Now, in the problem of growth, the person becomes a fuller person in every sense of the word. And growth brings with it our gradual recognition of the supreme significance of the great ethical codes which have been given to the world by the most mature human beings whom we know. We realize that we have received as a heritage patterns suitable for proper behavior. We also realize that we have not fulfilled these patterns in most instances. Individuals have. Collective groups have not. We know, for example, that the average member of a belief cannot fully live up to the belief which they hold. We also know that the average Christian cannot actually live the Sermon on the Mount, that he cannot actually do all that is implied. That this depends upon a degree of growth greater than he possesses, inasmuch as this code was revealed to him by a person whose growth was far greater than his. Therefore, it is a problem of growing toward these principles as we can, but always recognizing that these principles are the best that we know. If when we attain these principles, they are discovered to be in some way inadequate, from this level of greater attainment, we will be able to project further convictions toward adequacy and to correct whatever limitations may be contained within a code. The ages have corrected and amended numerous codes, and it must always be this way. So we are working toward goals, but we cannot work toward them by working contrary to them. We work toward them by falling short of them, but not by voluntarily rejecting them or intentionally disobeying them. The same is true of the Mosaic Code. The same is true of the Gospel of Buddha, or the ethical code of Confucius, or the mystical code of Lao Tzu. The same is found in the mathematical philosophy of Pythagoras, or the great rationalistic systems of Plato and Aristotle. These codes were given to us by highly mature persons. And while a few may arise who can outgrow these codes, the majority of individuals will be a long time growing up to them. It means also, however, that we have directives, and that these directives indicate the kind of conduct that is appropriate to a degree of growth. Also, the kind of conduct to which we aspire by growth, and that therefore our way of growth is not a dim, unknown path, but a path that is marked by clear landmarks, not of a dogmatic nature to the thoughtful person, but of an idealistic nature, suitable to inspire in us the best of ourselves and dedicate the best to the service of the rest. It is therefore obvious that if we advance in the code of Christendom, we will advance in brotherly love. That if we advance in the Mosaic code, we will advance in honoring that which is true, and by refraining from that which is untrue. If we advance in the Buddhist code, we will advance in patience and acceptance and the development of quietude of consciousness. If we develop in the Taoist code, we shall develop in an increasing appreciation and veneration for the magnificent universal principles in which we exist. If we increase in the Confucian code, we shall have better homes, better families, and we shall realize, as Confucius realized, that the ideal parent is easily estimated. If a child of 16 was given the opportunity to select its parents from all the people in the world, would he select the one he has? If so, the parent is adequate. This is very simple, but very difficult. Simple to say, easy to sustain as a good thought, difficult to practice as a way of life. But all these codes do give us a certain sense of value. They tell us how security within ourselves, which is the only security there is, can be gradually enlarged and increased. Growth is toward this end. Growth is therefore toward the achievement of a better being. And as a result of this growth, there is an inevitable adjustment with society that is constructive. Impatience is not easily possible where growth is mature. The matured intellect does not expect the impossible. The mature person does not condemn other people for being that which they must reasonably be, considering the attainments which they have. True growth does not require agreement with us. It requires only that the individual shall agree to the best that is in him, and shall labor earnestly to enlarge his capacity to know what is best. That true growth is man's voluntary dedication to the enlargement of his own capacity, so that he will be less and less surprised by the experiences of life, and more able to voluntarily cooperate with the purposes which nature has intended. In this way, he achieves not only his own security, but promotes the growth of the world in which he lives. It then seems quite reasonable to assume that the main way in which we can grow is by enlarging capacity and by adapting through the use of faculties our consciousness to the increasing receptivity toward knowledge, understanding, and estimation. Now, many people have forgotten that man is really a composite being. When man is hungry, there are many kinds of hunger in that man. He is not only hungry for bread, but he will, if he has bread, he will hunger again. He is not only thirsty, but if he drinks water, he will thirst again. Therefore, he must have bread and he must have water, or he must have food and he must have drink. That is not entirely of this world, because the food which really satisfies him is the food which nourishes his true being. And this kind of food cannot be a monodiet. It cannot be that this individual feeds lustily of one substance alone in order that he may care for the many needs of his body. Physically, when man eats, he must take into his system many vitamins, proteins, carbohydrates, many minerals, many different substances to nourish all the parts of his nature. He does this by a variety of food. In the same way, in the nourishing of his total nature, his entire being, man must take in many different kinds of nutrition. He must nourish his emotions, his thoughts, his ideals. He must develop the various facets and sides of his mind. He cannot become one tract without at the same time suffering from limitation of attitude, meaning in turn inadequacy. And from this inadequacy, he will be unable to perceive clearly value. Therefore, he is limited in his power to grow. He can easily exhaust the small capacity that he has unless he continues to increase his capacity. So what do we do? Some individuals pin all their faith upon certain ideas. One individual believes that if he belongs to a certain belief, thinks of nothing else, studies nothing else, rejects all else, that in this way he will achieve a great deal of penetration. There is no doubt that he does. But if on the physical level of nutrition he made the same decision and decided to restrict his entire diet from now on to nothing but calcium, he would probably end up in a situation resembling that of Lot's wife. He would become a solid block of concrete of some kind. You cannot do things this way. What we have to do is to balance our nutrition. If we fail to balance our mental and emotional nutrition, we are in grave danger of bigotry, of fanaticism, or of falling into some unreasonable belief and the destruction of our common sense. Thus we must have many things. If we work hard in our business, we must have our relaxations and our pleasures. If we are giving our lives to the advancement of the art of plumbing, it is very important perhaps that we also study music. If we have spent our time as a bookkeeper, we should visit the great art galleries. We should go to the great concerts. If we find ourselves desk-bound day after day, perhaps we need that craft shop where we can make things with our hands. If we are indoors all the time with a limited perspective on life, perhaps we need the garden, the spade, and the power to create flowers and beauty. If our natural life is alone, we need friends. If our family is childless, we need to be associated with children. If various situations arise by which there is a danger that we shall lose contact, and through loss of contact lose sympathy, we must take every possible precaution to preserve these values, because if we do not, we restrict our power to grow. Growth is not intensive achievement in something. This may be profession. This may be trade. This may be the basis of our economic security. But this one-pointedness is the base of our most terrible neurotic situations. We cannot function successfully in this way. To grow, then, means a largeness in ourselves. It means that we no longer have blank spots in our common thinking. For wherever there is a blank spot, there is a potential misunderstanding. Wherever there is darkness, there is a potential lack of understanding, lack of tolerance, lack of patience, lack of sympathy. Thus, our real growth is the general improvement of our nature, so that more and more of our faculty power can be turned to the total process of living. Actually, living is the one process which uses every faculty that we possess. And to live well means that all these faculties must make a reasonable contribution. Now, it is not required that at any particular time man have the full use of all faculties. Such a condition would cause him to far exceed so great a genius as Leonardo da Vinci, who was able to perform or to master more than 60 arts and sciences, but still only to scratch the surface of learning. We are not required to attain such magnificence of ability. We are merely required to use all of our faculties on the level of our general adaptation to life. We are to use the degree of all our faculties as these relate to the station we occupy, the things we are doing, and the degree of understanding which we have already developed. But through the development of the potentials of these faculties, our capacity for greater understanding is constantly enlarged. In order to, therefore, have true growth, we must be continuously improving. This continuous improvement has a distinct tendency to take the sharp edges off of our attitudes. One of the problems that certain types of individuals have always worried about is that the thoughtful person is not the kind of individual who is always making solemn pronouncements about what is so and what is not so. We know perfectly well, for example, that ignorance can contribute to a tremendous dynamic. The individual who does not think, is not limited by his mind, is in this way left completely at the pressure of his emotions. And if he does not assume responsibility, if he does not weigh things, if he is not understanding in his judgments, he can be immediate and dramatic in his pronouncements. Therefore, if he is sufficiently ignorant, he can make all the kinds of decisions which we associate with a man like Adolf Hitler, who, having very little understanding of anything, was very certain of everything. If he had been a more educated man, he would never have been a dictator. This man, therefore, represented an intensity due to ignorance, due to the same type of thing that creates mob violence, due to the same type of thing which can cause us, in smaller ways, to be lured away from common sense into some unreasonable and despotic position, simply because we do not think. If, however, we do think, we are more inclined to be moderate. Therefore, the true use of mental energy in the development of our resources is that it shall lead to moderation and not to excess. That all moderate attitudes are the basis of solid judgments, and that these moderate attitudes, by not fanning our emotions, permit us to come to factual, honorable, kindly, gracious conclusions without being whipped by some pressure or intensity, or without allowing fanaticism to unseat the reason. Thus, growth shows increasing sense of capacity to administer. It shows increasing ability to adjust to conditions, and an increasing disinclination to hasty judgment, criticism, or condemnation. The really growing person, then, is one who is gradually developing an internal strength that is stronger than external circumstance. Therefore, he is not just patient because he has to be. He is patient because his inner consciousness invites patience. He is tolerant because tolerance is no longer an acquired attitude. It is an inherent and natural ability of consciousness itself, because he knows why he has this attitude. It is not cultivated as a virtue suitable to society. It is attained as a quality necessary to himself. If we watch growth, then, and watch the persons whose growth has resulted in the best for mankind, we shall see that these persons, although their lives may have been difficult, certainly had withal a tremendous resource, a tremendous wealth of inner strength, by which the things which would seem to us to be extraordinary sacrifices and tremendous decisions are really, or were really, of very slight importance to these persons. We can think of the case of Socrates, who, rather than pay a small fine which he did not believe was just, preferred to permit himself to be the victim of the injustice of the Athenian state. Socrates' decision to place honor above life would be a decision that would rack us to the soul, and which perhaps we would not normally be able to make, except under some tremendous pressure of circumstances. But to Socrates, this was not a great decision. This was not a soul-shaking catastrophe. It was a simple use of value. He simply lived as he knew he had to live. And when he could no longer live this way, and could only continue to survive by compromising his own inner life, he chose to remain true to that which was true. And the centuries have vindicated him. The same is true of the crucifixion of Jesus. The same is true of the martyrdom of the early Christians in the arena at Rome. The same is true of men who have gone into the jungle and died of various diseases and plagues in order to serve men. The same kind of heroic self-sacrifice to common good has distinguished the career of Dr. Albert Schweitzer. These men apparently have penalized themselves, and instead of a fine city practice and 2 or 3 good automobiles and a chain of apartment houses, Dr. Schweitzer has chosen to go out into the jungles and work with the sick. This is not a sacrifice for him. This is the thing that fulfilled him. This is the thing that made him able to face his life and his God. Therefore, if the individual is really growing, all these sad and sorrowful complaints of the pseudo-growing will not be heard. The individual in growing fulfills. He is that which he most desires to be. And when he most desires to be better than he is, his greatest happiness is to fulfill that desire. And in it also lies his greatest usefulness to himself and his fellow men. It is therefore not a matter of an individual continually placing growth in opposition to comfort. Growth is not uncomfortable. An individual who is trying to claim virtues which he does not possess will be very uncomfortable. But if he is merely claiming the birthright of that which he is, the only thing that can make him uncomfortable is his failure to make the claim. He is resolved and determined that his life shall be lived from the best of himself. When he means this, when he lives accordingly, and when this best in himself sustains him, he is right. If this best in ourselves does not sustain us, then this best is not yet good enough. And our first problem is to make it good enough. We cannot live inconsistently. We cannot live one code on the inside and the other code on the outside of our personalities. If we really intellectually realize that we should be a better person, then it is our immediate holden duty to become that better person. For it is only in that way that we can be happy. Happiness is fulfillment of life purpose. Pleasure is fulfillment, perhaps, of the purposes of change and incident. But where there is pleasure, there is very apt to ultimately be pain, for these are mingled together in a hopeless compound. But where there is true happiness, this happiness absorbs unhappiness into itself. The truly good person, the growing person, can be subject to any affliction that flesh is heir to. But if he is growing, and is truly growing, he will always be equal or greater than his affliction. He will always find that this affliction is less than the achievement which he has attained. Therefore, that he can carry this affliction with a reasonable degree of dignity. Now, it is not true that all good people are afflicted and all bad people have a wonderful time. This is a common belief, but it is not supported by facts. The reason why we think that bad people have a wonderful time is because we do not know them very well and estimate the entire conclusion from a few lines in the paper announcing that they are on their way to some place of pleasure or some resort, or another little line to the effect that they have just bought a new home. These things are what we read about. But the individual who has not achieved to a certain measure of internal integration can never enjoy real happiness. And I have been around enough with people who are envied to know that they in turn envy the simplest person who has peace of soul. This is a common and inevitable circumstance. They envy them, but they are not willing to sacrifice anything of themselves to get that peace of soul. So they die rich and miserable, envied by fools, and knowing in their hearts that they themselves are fools. But caught in a pattern, they find no escape. It is also definitely true that the good and the bad, the intelligent and the foolish, the wise and the simple, must pass through practically all of the major circumstances of life. Therefore, the attainment of wisdom, the adjustment to growth and change arising from within ourselves, does not alter the basic facts of our existence. It alters, however, our ability to handle these facts with dignity, with understanding, and with enlightenment. We may therefore, I think, affirm beyond question, and I believe the experience of ages will support this, that growth does not actually add to burden. It adds to our power to solve burden, to cure that which can be cured, and to bear with dignity, honor, and regard that which cannot be changed. Thus we gain internal poise, freedom, relaxation, and peace. And from this quietude within ourselves must stem further growth. For the future development of the individual grows from the quietude of his present adjustment. It is only within himself that he can grow. It is only when he is at peace with himself that he can become aware of his own needs. It is only in the quietude of a life brought into order by understanding that the person can unfold the natural powers with which he is endowed. So true growth increases those internal elements of peace and adjustment, by which the vision is cleared, by which the mind, relieved of false tensions, can think more clearly. The emotions, freed of false attachments, can feel true values more immediately. Out of growth, true growth, therefore, comes the substance of further growth. Out of false growth, or assumed virtues which are not real, there comes no immediate good. Only that ultimate good which comes from the final discovery of the vanity of our own ways. But this can be a very long, expensive, and painful procedure. Ignorance and not wisdom causes suffering, sustains suffering, or makes suffering inevitable. Thus, in adjusting to growth, we have only one principle to concern us. In the observance of ourselves, if we are growing, we find adjustment natural, simple. It emerges from within us. It arises in our own consciousness. We instinctively adjust. We are naturally happy. We are naturally glad that we are privileged to grow. If growth, on the other hand, as we call it, brings with it continuous irritation, leaves us unable to cope with today or tomorrow, alienates us from everyone around us, destroys our value in society, if these situations arise, what we call growth is not growth for us. It is not the thing we need. It is the will attempting to change the nature according to a concept. It is not life unfolding a nature according to its own law. If we can straighten this out in our own thinking, I think we can adjust to any form of growth. Because growth is actually the adventure of life. And we can adjust to it if we are personally willing to make the improvements in ourselves and to recognize the fault signs when they do appear and correct them immediately. Growth, then, should always be a gradual attainment of those qualities which we admire in persons of acknowledged growth. Throughout the ages, we have respected most those who have grown. And we know that from them the great progress of our world has come. We know that most of these persons were not recognized in their own time or understood. Many were persecuted. But where they were persecuted, we have no evidence that this persecution caused them to be disillusioned in the truths that they held, or to lose faith in the God which they worshipped. Actually, these so-called difficulties bound them more strongly to their conviction and gave them the greater incentive to live well and honorably. Therefore, in summarizing our problem of growth, I think the matter is a reasonably simple one. If we are truly growing, we are glad. And most of all, if we are truly growing, those around us are glad because we are better people. If those around us are not glad, we should investigate our own growing and make certain that we are not substituting merely stubbornness of opinion for true personal unfoldment. If our own lives have been made more difficult, and we cannot honestly say that growth has been of greater good to us than anything else that has ever happened, then we are not truly growing and must reestimate our problem to see where our own mistake lies. If for one moment we would really wish to know less than we do, then we do not know as much as we think we do. These problems, thoughtfully and carefully considered, will adapt us to any changes not only due to our own circumstances, but to world circumstances. And regardless of time or place, we will grow and bear a good fruit. And our growth will be like that of a flower, an unfoldment into beauty. And as nature in all ways makes things beautiful in growing, so the human soul becomes beautiful in growing. And the end of all growth in nature is fruitfulness. And the fruitfulness of the soul is peace and love and understanding and patience and charity and unselfishness. These are the fruits of man, and these are the fruits of the tree of life, and these fruits are for the healing of the nations. And until we realize the importance of these truths, these fruits, the sickness of nations will not be remedied. But we have the right to grow, the most blessed right there is. Let us use it wisely and lovingly. Thank you very much.